A potential new malaria vaccine has proved highly effective in a trial in babies in Africa. And this points to the vaccine one day possibly helping reduce the death toll from the mosquito-borne disease that kills up to 500,000 young children a year. Well, to hear a little bit more about this new vaccine, we're now joined by Professor John Frean, who is the Deputy Director of Microbiology at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases. Prof, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good evening.
So, exciting news then about what the trial has shown so far.
Yes, it certainly does show there's a potential with this vaccine, but I think we have to just look at the trial itself and understand that this is really preliminary work, and a lot more has to be done before this vaccine is properly evaluated.
What do we know about how this vaccine works compared to its predecessors?
Okay, so it is related to the only other vaccine that's reached the stage of large-scale clinical trials. That's GSK's RTSS vaccine, which is now in developmental studies in 3 countries in Africa, large-scale studies still. So it's related to that, but it does seem to be an improvement on it in that its immunogenicity, in other words, the degree to which it stimulates an immune response, does appear to be somewhat better than RTSS. But as I say, we really only reached the preliminary clinical studies with this new one.
So they're talking about 77% efficacy. How is that measured in a mosquito environment? We've only just come to terms with measuring the efficacy of COVID-19 vaccines where they have control groups, etc., etc. Is it a similar process for vaccines such as this?
Oh, yes, absolutely the same principle. In other words, you blindly immunize your subjects, in this case children, with either the trial vaccine or a control vaccine. In this case, it was a rabies vaccine. And then you see how many in each group develop malaria. And by comparing them, you get an estimate of the efficacy. But this is only after a year of the trial, so it's really I keep pushing this.
Yeah.
It really is early days, and much more extensive and large-scale trials need to be done.
All right. So, yeah, I believe only 450 children. But I suppose it's a whole process of building knowledge, isn't it? Where you start somewhere, build on that, and then move on to the next phase. So typically, what would the next phase look like?
So the next phase would probably be an extended phase 2 trial, which is what this one is, a phase 2, looking at longer-term efficacy. Ultimately, the real trial of choice, or the one that will give the real answer, is a large-scale clinical randomized controlled trial, where large numbers of children in multiple centers across variable or varying degrees of malaria transmission are immunized, and the efficacy assessed on those grounds.
We've seen the COVID-19 virus mutate over time. Has the mosquito virus parasite also shown the same traits, that whilst you develop vaccines, there could be mutations taking place along the way?
Well, the malaria parasite is a much more complex organism than the coronavirus. And whereas the coronavirus has only a few genes, the malaria parasite has many hundreds or even, well, certainly hundreds of genes. And therefore, um, it's a much more complex target. And the parasite has, over time, evolved to develop defense mechanisms against the human immune response. Because this parasite has been with us for millions of years, and it's adapted very well to the human host. And therefore, yes,
Yeah.
it has developed strategies to evade the immune system, and the real secret of which is why it's been so difficult to produce a vaccine to malaria. There are many uh, scientists have tried, and many um, candidate vaccines are in various stages of development.
Right.
But the fact that only one has reached the stage of large-scale use points to the difficulty in actually coming up with an effective vaccine for malaria.
So help us understand. I've traveled quite a bit on the continent, and in some areas it's mandatory to take these anti-malarial tablets before you go. Are we saying that these tablets are not real protection then, if we're still searching for a vaccine? What are we saying?
Well, one of the problems with drugs is the parasite, along with many other pathogens, of course, can develop resistance to drugs, and that's certainly what's happened as far as drug treatment is concerned in other parts of the world. We're very nervous that the resistance that's developed in Southeast Asia is now going to spread to Africa, and we really have very few candidate drugs. So yes, and prophylaxis, the preventive medicines that you're talking about, resistance to them can also develop. So the drugs in themselves are not they're part of the management and control of malaria, especially for short-term visitors.
Mm.
But ultimately, for the many millions of children who are exposed at high levels throughout the year, it's not possible to give them prophylaxis all the time.
All right, so I guess we come back to this R21 trial. We've learned some things, but I suppose long-term effects still, we have no clue, and that's another area that we need to be cognizant of.
You mean adverse effects?
Or any kinds of aid, how long does it keep you immune, if that's what we're seeing, and perhaps even adverse effects as you've raised it.
Yes, exactly. It does need to be studied in the longer term, and assessment has to be made as to whether boosters will be required. I mean, in this trial, they gave 4 doses of the vaccine over a year. And they did obviously get a very good immune response because the efficacy was very good. But the practicalities of giving that many inoculations on a large scale, it has to be, properly assessed. And ultimately, the target group for this malaria vaccine is really not travelers or older people. It's young children, and preferably infants, at the time that they're getting their routine immunization. And ideally, if it's shown to be effective, which will be in a few years' time, I guess, it will ideally be given along with their routine infant vaccines, with
Oh.
tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, and so on.